going to talk about lesson 2 in chapter 10 in the training kit for exam 70/462. That is about concurrency. My name is Søren Agerbo and I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I will try to guide you through some tips and tricks that you hopefully can use for the exam. Remember, there's only one way to pass the exam, and that is to learn the stuff and learn how to work with the SQL Server. So my suggestion is watch this video, read the chapter again if you have read it already, and then start doing some practicing and learn the necessary things. So why do we talk about concurrency? You see, the problem is that if we have two users using the system, then we might end up in potential problems. We might end up in that a user updates a record that has just been updated by another user and therefore should not have been updated. We might end up in 3 different problem scenarios that I'll describe a little bit later. It's in the book. But before we do that, we will talk about transactions. I have decided only to tell you about explicit transactions. If you want to, then you can Google the word implicit transaction, and then you will read about that in a SQL Server. Then we're talking about logs, and we're talking about log compatibility. Then we talk about transactional isolation levels, deadlocks, and then diagnostics. Can we find information somewhere where we can see what happens in a SQL Server? So let's start moving over to the SQL Server like this, and what you might see here is that we have that VentureWorks database, and what I will do now is that I will start a new query, and you can see it has session ID 54. I write select star from person just to show you the data. Imagine that I want to do an update instead, so that I want to update person set first name equal ltrim that removes spaces in front and after the name. You see, this is normal. This is, if I just ran this, then I would be running an implicit transaction. But if I write begin tran, then I've stated an explicit transaction, and this transaction will end with a commit L or a rollback. And now we have the first problem. Imagine that this update takes 10 hours. That would be terrible, but just imagine it. If I run this now, then I have changed the data, but I have not committed them yet, and I have not rolled them back yet. So that means actually I am not sure if the data will be committed or rolled back, and that is because that my transaction, there might be 20 more steps, for example an if or a select or some code, and that could, depending on the result of that code, we could end up in a rollback or a commit. And now what we are talking about now is that since I have started a transaction, then I have taken some logs on the table. So let's try to do that. Select star from sysdm tran logs, and what I basically can see, if I go down to the bottom here, I have a lot of XML and so on. That's not the purpose of that. So what we could do instead is that we could try to see if we could find something we can use. I'm sorry about this. Oh, just 1 second. Here it is. So I could try to see if I can find an object or something like that. So you can see where resource subtype like, oops, sorry, object. Let's see if we find something. Nope. Okay, we have a problem here. We need to find if we have any log. Here we have something. Sorry, I should have been doing it in time. I can see here that I have a log on a object, and the object name is this. So let's see if that is the correct one. So I select star from sys objects where object ID equal this one, and yes, that is my person table. So I found the correct log, and what I can see is that if I find it again, here it is, then I can see that it is a exclusive log. An exclusive log means that it is completely, to be honest, a completely don't do anything with that table. So that actually means that if another person wants to access that table, then they can't do it. I just a second, where resource type not in metadata database. Let's try to make it a little bit more simple. So here you are. For now that's perfect. So now we can see we only have the object. So what does that mean? It's basically until this person here has committed or rolled back his transaction, then in the default isolation level, then another user can't access that data. You see now we start another user session. Select start from person.person. Here 5, and you will see nothing happens. As long as there is a log that are exclusive, then no one can access that table. So we say, so what we do is now that we click here and we say, oh sorry, I didn't want to update anyway, so I roll back like that, and when I roll back, then right away this user gets his information. Okay, then let's try another thing. What will happen if we do something like this instead? Set where person business entity ID equals 10. Now run this without the rollback. I've updated one row now, and if this user here tries a select statement, then nothing will happen because at least one row has an exclusive log. So what we can test is we can go in and look here, and we can see we have a lot of information now. So first of all, what I can see is that I just stopped this one, sorry. Here, click F5. So what I can see is that I have on my key, I have an exclusive log there. Then on the page that is the next level, I have an intended exclusive, and on the object I have an intent exclusive log. The reason for that is that if another user drops by this object and he or she wants to take a log, then they can say, okay, there's someone that has an intended exclusive log on the object. That means that at a lower level there is someone who has an exclusive log. Then if we have 20 pages, then this one page is in file 1, page 1472, we have an intended exclusive log. So that means that someone has an exclusive log on something that can be logged on a lower level, and this situation is on a key. That means that if I am going to update something on page 1473 actually, then I come by and I can see, okay, there's an intended exclusive log on the object. It doesn't matter, I only need to log one row, and it's on page 1473. Okay, no one has a log there. So these intended exclusive is, from my best opinion, a performance issue. But what I can see is that one key is exclusively locked. So what happens if I say where business entity equal 9, for example, and clear file? You see that is not locked, so I'm allowed to read that one. I could also write in 1.2.3.4.5. Guess what happens now? I'm allowed to run this. Okay, now the trick question is, what if I do this different from 10? Then we have a break, because then we will hit the key that is actually exclusively locked because of the way that the SQL server is working. So if you go into the book and you look at page 443, then you will see a table called objects that SQL server can log. What you can see there is that you see a row identifier, a key, a page, an extent, a heap or B tree, a table, file, application, metadata, allocation, unit, and database. The typical we use is key, page, and table. If you have a heap, you will also see a row identifier a lot. That's just my best point, my opinion. So you of course need to learn all the objects that can be logged. And you find information about logs in the dynamic management view system logs. So, okay, let's see what happens now. Still nothing here, and you can see I've canceled. If I run this one again, then what can we see now? You can see that I have a shared log on this one, and I have an intended share on an object, and that's basically it. So I think it's quite nice actually if you learn this. I stop it again. And let's see. Great. So on page 444, then you can see the different log modes, and I always say that the most interesting ones are shared. That's the S one, update U, and then we have the exclusive, and that's the X. And all of them you can have in an intent version also, so you can put an I in front. Schema, bulk update, key range are also important of course, but start learning these. An update log is taken. If I want to update a table, then I log all the records I want to update, and when I have logged all of them with an update log, then when I start updating, then when I updated a row, or when I want to update a row, then I take an exclusive log. And the reason for that is that it can take some time to log all rows so that I can start updating. And there you set an update log, because an update log you can read when you have an update log. When you have an exclusive log, then you saw earlier what happened, nothing can be done. And log compatibility can be seen in table 10.4 on page 445, and you can see, for example, at the bottom you have an exclusive log. You can't have a shared log on that, you can't have an update log, you can't have an intended, you can't have nothing on that. If you have a shared log, then you can see that you can have other shared logs. You can take an update log, but you can't take an exclusive log. So you need to learn when can I take different types of logs. Great. The reason for all this is that we want to make sure data is valid. Data is valid in our terms, in SQL terms. If you look at page 446, there you can see you have three problems. You have dirty read, non-repeatable reads, phantom reads. And if we start with the dirty reads, then let's have an example. I just click roll back. Let's make sure that nothing is so. That's it. Imagine that I do this update here. What I want to avoid, sorry, I just roll back again. 1 second, here it is, like this. Now I want to update all first names to so on. Do that, and it is done now, but it's in a transaction. That means that it is not committed. That is. So now I want to have a select statement, and I can't do that because the SQL Server as a standard setting does not allow dirty reads. That means I do not want to read uncommitted transactions. But if I want that, then I can change the isolation level and saying, okay, now this transaction that are an implicit transaction, it's okay that I read records that another transaction has changed but not yet committed. So I can do it in two ways, with read on committed, like that, and I can select now instead. I just stop it, and now we can see that I get my data, but I get the change data. So I could also have written it for that was a table, and I could also write set transaction isolation level read on committed. Oops, there it is. Read, so like this, there it is, and that works the same way. If I set it as read committed, then I will not see anything, because read committed means that this implicit transaction here will not be allowed to read uncommitted transactions. So we don't want to have dirty reads here. If you don't want non-repeatable reads, then you have to set it as repeatable reads instead. And repeatable reads means that you don't have dirty reads. That means you will only read committed transactions. And it also means that if you have a transaction, for example, like this, and you read something, read first name, where ID, forget about the code, it's just an example. And then it takes 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then you ask the same query again. Then in the scope of the transaction, then you will of course expect to get the same result back. That is non-repeatable reads. So we must in some way make sure, when we want to run this in isolation level repeatable read, we want to make sure that no one can change the dataset that we have requested until we are finished with our transaction. And the only way to do this is by adding logs. Then we have phantom reads. And phantom read means that, as a good example, let's imagine that you have a select count parentheses star. Then you start reading, and before you are finished with these, then a user moves ID number 1 to ID number 20, for example. You have 10 rows or whatever you have now. Then the same row will be counted 2 times. We don't want that, and that's actually a phantom read. And then you need to have an isolation level called serializable, like this. Then you log a lot of things, and then basically you will not have any chance to have a multi-user system, if you ask me. So these 4 isolation levels, read uncommitted, read committed, that are the default, repeatable reads, and serializable, you need to learn them to the exam. You need to learn that there's something called logs, and then finally you need to learn how a transaction works and how these dynamic management views are working. So that's it. See, I have logged a lot of pages here. It's quite funny. I just roll back like that. Let's see how that's working. Whoop, boom, 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 and that's it. I have no logs anymore. Great. Then suddenly at some point Microsoft realized that that logging would cause a lot of bad performance, because you had to wait and wait and wait until everybody was finished and so on. So therefore they implemented another type of standard, another type of isolation levels, and the first one is called snapshot isolation level, and you can see the code on page 447, and it's called alt database set allow snapshot isolation level. See, the issue is that this one is working as serializable, but it doesn't take logs. It simply just uses tempdb to store different versions of records. That means that there's a overhead. I have heard 10 to 12%, but I'm not sure. So there's an overhead, and this overhead, when you write some data, will be acceptable if you can have serializable. That means you don't have any of these 3 problems: dirty read, non-repeatable read, phantom reads, and you have many users on the system, because they will never wait on each other anymore. The problem is that you explicitly have to tell the isolation level. Then what you also can do is that you can set another statement so that you can set it in a read committed mode, and if you do that, then you will end up having another way where every time you run a transaction in read committed isolation level mode, then you will use versioning instead of logs, and then you'll get a great performance, and you don't need to do anything explicitly, and it's actually quite easy just to do. So It's very simple. Just have to learn everything, and then that's it. Then on page number 449, then you can see that there is a little description of some dynamic management views that you must know. I've shown you the one, and it's simply just about learning them. There's also something called system exec requests. I think it's quite interesting. Deadlocks is another issue. That's on page 450. I'll not go in through it here, but I could draw your attention to page 451, where you can see some trace flags, trace 1204 and 1222. You of course need to learn these trace flags also for the exam. And then you have the activity monitor. So, and you find the activity monitor here on the instance, and activity monitor, it's a tool that no one actually is using, but sorry, I just wanted to see something. But what you can do is, here you can, for example, click on a resource weights as described on page 452, and then you can see logs and whatever you're waiting for. It's quite good also. There's a lot of dynamic management views described on page 453 to define bottlenecks, and one nice thing that I've seen a lot of people that does not know is also that you can, some places in the management tool, you can right click and you can choose reports, and then you have a lot of standard reports: index, usage stats, physical schema, change history, all blocking transactions, and whatever you want to, just click on it and then you get some information. And the final thing is that if you really hate a person because, or a session because they use a lot of they have a lot of logs and or use a lot of resources, then you can write kill, and then you can add the session ID in this 54. In this situation I've clicked it and then he's gone. That's it. So that was lesson 2 in the very good chapter, implement index and concurrency. I think this is one of the most important parts when it comes to performance in the SQL server. You have to learn that. Thank you very much.